Good morning. Uh, as Tom said, my name is Michael Brook, and I've been working here at the ELI as a tutor and also as an instructor occasionally for about 8 years. And before that, I was a math professor at UD for 20 years. I was born in 1949, so I am a baby boomer. And the 60s is my time. I was in high school and university and in those days, and I participated in a lot of things that you have been discussing, such as the anti-war movement. I was there. Today, I'd like to discuss the space program, the efforts of the United States and also other countries, especially the Soviet Union, or people used to say Russia mostly, but the Soviet Union, in getting a man to orbit around the Earth, to land people on the moon. And this was known as the space race. So I'd like to begin. This is when I became aware of the space race. On October 4th, 1957. And actually it was probably October 5th, because in those days, today we hear the news immediately. When something happens, you hear about it in 30 seconds. But in those days, we usually had to wait a day to find out what happened yesterday from the newspaper. And my father brought home a newspaper, and it said here that the Soviet Union had launched a satellite that went entirely around the Earth, an artificial moon. This was the first time that humanity had ever done anything like that. And that's a picture of it. It was called, most people called it Sputnik, but my family's from Russia, so I pronounce it Sputnik, which is the way the Russians do. Anyway, this is the newspaper headline from that day, from the Chicago Tribune, which my hometown is Chicago. Reds fire moon into sky. Do you know what Reds means?
Yes,
Say it again? Yeah, the communists, the Reds, the Soviet Union, Russia, exactly. And you can see there are some at the very far left here, to your left, there's an article about a riot, some violence in Warsaw, Poland, and that Poland was under the influence of the Soviet Union, and there was a lot of trouble there at the time. So this was Cold War, and you've mentioned the term Cold War. This was the Cold War. Our president at the time was President Eisenhower, over there on the left. He was a war hero. He was the commander of the Allied forces, the U.S., British, and Canadian forces in Europe in the Second World War. He was the president at the time. And the leader of the Soviet Union was Nikita Khrushchev. He was one of the things he was famous for at the United Nations. There was something happening there that he didn't like. I can't remember, but he took his shoe off and he banged it on the table. That was his protest. He was a very colorful character. He brought a lot of reforms into the Soviet Union, and under him, the Soviet Union became a little bit more liberalized. We were shocked. Americans were shocked that the Soviet Union, who we considered to be ignorant farmers, could put a satellite around the moon. That was a huge shock to us. My parents, unlike most people, were sympathetic to the Soviet Union. Most Americans were not favorable towards the Soviet Union, but my parents were. And so my father came home and he was very happy about this. He said, "Oh my God, these Americans thought that the Soviet Union was so ignorant, but look what they did. Just a few weeks later, the Soviet Union launched another satellite called Sputnik 2, which had a dog in it. And they picked up the dog from the street. This was just a stray dog. We call it a mutt, some common dog. Unfortunately, the dog died in space, I'm sorry to say. And that happened, actually I have the date wrong there. No, that is the date right. That is the correct date, sorry. The United States, soon after, established NASA, which means the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. This was the government department that whose goal was to put people in space, explore space, and eventually put men on the moon. Now, as I said, American people were shocked, but as it turns out, when I researched this, I thought that the government was surprised too. But as I look back, the government wasn't surprised. As it says here, the government knew that the Soviet Union was going to send up a satellite, but the president and his advisors just didn't think it was important. They did not think it was important. They considered the military more important, and they felt like they were wasting money by going into space. I'm going to take a brief moment to just double check that my recording is working. Yes, it is. Okay. I'll just edit this part. Okay, so note this last statement, that the Soviets had a better grasp or understanding of propaganda. You know that word, propaganda? No. Propaganda is what the government tells you, or anybody, but especially the government tells you to believe it. Propaganda can be true, propaganda can be a lie, but mostly propaganda says we're good and the other people, our enemy or competitor, is bad. And so the space race turned out to be a propaganda war. Each side, the United States and the Soviet Union, saying, we're the best. I'm going to skip that. Okay, so I'm going to do a song. The name of this song is Sputniks and Muttniks. Now, as I said before, a mutt is just a common dog. Not a special fancy dog like you might see, but just a regular old dog. And this song is in the American country music style. The country music style of America is basically the style of white Southerners. However, it has very strong influences from African American music also. So, Sputniks and Muttniks. Sputniks and Muttniks flying through the air. Sputniks and Muttniks flying everywhere. They're so ironic. Are they atomic? Those funny missiles have got me scared. Strangest looking objects I ever saw from space, with the dog inside that's got to ride into the USA. Be a hound dog or American groundhog, that Russian canine can't stand the pain. Sputniks and Muttniks flying through the air. Sputniks and Muttniks flying everywhere. Are they ironic? Are they atomic? Those funny missiles have got me scared. Our scientists admitted that we're 5 years behind, and if that's true, I'm telling you, this hiding place is mine. Don't care if it's roomy, as long as it's roomy. And so it's somewhere Sputnik can find. Sputniks and Mudniks flying through the air. Sputniks and Mudniks flying everywhere. They're so ironic. Are they atomic? Those funny missiles have got me scared. Thank you. Sputniks and Mutniks. Okay. One thing that, if you want, later you can ask about if there's any words here that you see that you don't know, or you can even interrupt me right now if you like. Okay. Sputniks and Mutniks. Okay. So this next song is called Sputnik Baby. That's a typical kind of song title. One thing I want to point out is that that first song talks about people being scared, people being afraid of the Sputnik. This song talks about being proud that we are going to match you. So Mr. Khrushchev, once again, he's the leader of the Soviet Union. Okay, so here we go, Sputnik Baby. This song is in the American blues style, blues, B-L-U-E-S, which is an African-American style, also comes originally from the South, but came up the Mississippi River to Chicago, St. Louis, other northern cities. Listen, Mr. Khrushchev, I heard a lot of talk of satellites and missiles and Eisenhower's fault. But now you better listen to what I gotta say. The things I'm gonna tell you, man, will make the culture gray. I got a spotlight, baby, with a red hot style that's new. I got a satellite, baby, that can rock it all night through. She can make more speed than Sputnik #2. Now you talk about the Sputnik and your hound dog crew. I got a rocket, baby, faster than the Asiatic flu. I got a satellite, baby, with a style that's new. She can make more speed than Sputnik #2. I got a hot rocket, baby, that can leave you anytime. I got a hot rocket, baby, that can leave you flying blind. When she gets in gear, you'll think it's the end of time. Now you talk about your Sputnik and your hound dog crew. I got a rocket, baby, faster than the Asiatic flu. I got a hot rocket, baby, with a style that's new. She can make more speed than Sputnik #2. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so Sputniks and Mutniks and Satellite Baby. All right. So the space race went on. The Soviet Union remained ahead in the space race. Soviets put the first man to orbit around the Earth, and his name was Yuri Gagarin. There he is. In April of '61. And this was his capsule, this was his ship. They put the capsule on top of a rocket and the capsule separates. So that's where Gagarin went up. Now the United States, of course, was in competition with the Soviet Union and wanted to do better. So the United States sent a man up whose name is John Glenn. John Glenn just died fairly recently. He's a famous man. He was a United States Senator. He ran for president. And at 77 years old, now here he's in his middle 30s, at 77 years old, he went up in space again.
Oh, sorry, is he the first astronaut in the United States?
Yeah, John Glenn, now what happened was, before John Glenn, there were people who went up, but they didn't go around the world. They're called suborbital. A man named Alan Shepard. We watched it on TV in school. I remember that day. But he's the first American who went all the way around the Earth. Went around the Earth 3 times. Now there's an interesting connection. If you'll look at that poster up there, the movie Hidden Figures. The movie Hidden Figures is about a group of women. They were African-American women. This woman, Katherine Johnson, is still alive. And they were mathematicians. In those days, mathematicians, they had computers, but their computers were very, very weak, slow, had little memory compared to what we have now. Your phone is more powerful than their $1-million computers in those days. They would hire people to do mathematical work, and they did a lot of the work with a pencil. And this woman, Katherine Johnson, let's get back to her. John Glenn asked her to double check the computer. And he said, if she says it's okay for me to go, I will go. Otherwise, I will not go. Significant thing is, this was a time, you have discussed the civil rights movement, this was a time when there was segregation, separation between blacks and whites. They did this work in Virginia, which was a southern state, well, is still a southern state, but in those days, there was a very strong separation between blacks and whites. Black people had to go to a different bathroom, different drinking fountain. But they came to where they worked, it's called Langley. The atmosphere was a little bit different. There still was some segregation. There still was separation between blacks and whites, but not as much. And they met a lot of people from other parts of the country whose attitudes towards race was not so fixed and so strong. And so she said that the atmosphere was pretty good. In the movie, they show it a little bit worse than I think that she said it was. But definitely in the town around them, it was not easy for African Americans. That's Katherine Johnson. I just want to mention some things about the computing environment back in those days. Maybe some of you are computer science students, perhaps. Anybody a computer science student? Nope, but we all use computers. We have a powerful computer right in front of us. Here's an example. They had a computer called the IBM 360, which at one point during the space program, each of them cost $3.5 million. And your phone is better than that computer. They had 64K memory. 64K is nothing. You can write a research paper that will be more than 64K. 64,000 bytes of memory. Their speed. We've got speeds that are in the level of millions of times faster than they were. But they sent the person to the moon. So it was pretty good. There was a lot of hand calculation and brain work. Now, I mentioned a little bit before about the American tradition of blues music, the American blues style. Blues is extremely important. Blues, to a great extent, is the foundation of American popular music. Rock and roll, and then rock is a descendant of the blues. Jazz is a descendant of the blues. Hip-hop and rap is a descendant of the blues. The blues forms a very important foundation for American popular music. Now, this person was one of the earlier, but he lived until the 80s, so let's say in the middle part of the development of the blues in America. He was from Mississippi, and Mississippi was where a lot of the blues musicians came from. His name was Lightnin' Hopkins. Now, lightning, you know, during a storm, the electric charges that come through a storm. It was typical for blues musicians to use names like Lightnin', or there's another musician, he called himself Muddy Waters. That wasn't his name. His name was McKinley Morganfield. Or there was another musician, Chester Burnett, but he called himself Howlin' Wolf. So it was very imaginative, and the names they chose for themselves. And the story goes that Lightnin' Hopkins was eating breakfast, and in the morning he heard about John Glenn, and John Glenn going around the world 3 times. And so he wrote a song. The song came, he wrote the song very quickly, and it came out just a few weeks after John Glenn went up. Tom, I want to ask you to advance the slide as the lyrics go.
All right.
Thank you. Works from there? Yep.
Yep.
Okay, good. I woke up this morning with this on my mind. Said there ever been no man gone around the world 3 times, but John Glenn done it. Yes, he did. You know I'm talking about him, and he did it just for fun. Well, $500,000 made him feel so well. He got to eating his lunch, but he could hardly tell. He said, I feel all right. John Glenn said it. And everybody was laughing and dipping in the gritty. I don't know what dipping in the gritty means. I have no idea. Was a million prayers went up, praying that he would land. I saw a schoolhouse full of them, and they didn't know what to say. But they said, let him come back, God, please let him land. He's the only one who ever did it, and you're his helping hand. I seen him when he left, but I didn't see him when he landed. But I knew he was doing all right when they said it's okay to give him a great big hand. He'll be on the ship. They say he's on the deck. His mother said, I know my son's gonna make it. There ain't ever been no mistake. I'm gonna tell you something, I ain't lying. You know that man must have had on his mind flying, because there ain't nobody that's gonna do that for trying unless they're gonna build themselves their own airplane and they're gonna go flying. He told them, don't worry, this is true. You may miss me for a few minutes, but I'll be back to see about you. John Glenn did it. I just want to mention that a lot of the language in this song is what's known as African American vernacular, common speech of working class people, African American working class people. So there's a few things, like, for example, if we could back up a little bit from the very beginning. Okay. Go next slide. Yeah, this dipped in the gritty. That's some kind of idiom. I have no idea. Next one.
There was a million prayers.
Yeah, to use the singular instead of prayers, to use the singular. Onlyest. Now, I don't know if that's an African American kind of slang, but when we were kids, we used to say things like the bestest. You know, there's good, there's better, there's best, and then there's bestest, which is even better than best. Okay, we can go forward now. All right. So the United States continued to make its efforts to go into space, and our president, John F. Kennedy, made a speech in 1962. He was at a university, Rice University in Texas, and President Kennedy said that we're going to the moon. We are going to the moon, very forcefully. If we look at the next slide here, there's another picture of him. One more. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. John Kennedy was a very, very forceful speaker, forceful personality. And, you know, we believed him. I remember that I had a dream that I thought John Kennedy was my brother, older brother, and that he would give me a ride on his back, walk around. So a lot of people took John Kennedy very seriously. When he died, you probably know he was shot and killed. I remember sitting in high school. I was in high school. And I remember sitting in class, and all day what happened was the girls cried the whole day, and the boys sat and said nothing. Can you imagine a day in school like that? Well, that's what it was. Let's go to the next slide, please. In this here, we have vowed that we shall not see it governed, meaning the moon, by a hostile flag of conquest. That means the Soviets. Hostile means dangerous enemy, somebody who has something bad in mind for you. But by a banner, which means a flag, a banner of freedom and peace. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. This is the language. Now, he didn't write it, he had speech writers, but this is the language and personal character of John Kennedy, my position. We can go to the next one. Okay, so this is another part of the speech. I'm not going to speak this one. I want you to notice, I underlined every time he said decade. You know the meaning of the word decade? Okay. So he keeps saying the decade of the 60s, this decade. What I want to point out is that when this was happening in the 60s, we knew we were in the 60s. We thought, oh, we're in the 60s. This is a special time. We were aware of it. I don't know if we think about that today, like we're in the teens now of the 21st century. We don't think, oh, we're in the teens. But in the 60s, we thought we were in the 60s. The president knew it. Everybody knew it. All right, next one. Okay, I'll take it now. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so the United States established a program to go to the moon, and the name of the program was Apollo. Apollo was a Greek god of the sun, and Americans named their space program with the names of gods from Greece and Rome, ancient gods from Greece and Rome, and I think it had several purposes. I read an article about this. One was it just represented power. And we learned about Greek mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, their ancient stories in school. We would used to have a whole year, we spent a lot of time on that. Have you ever studied, I'm imagining that, is everybody here from China? Somebody here not from China. Do you ever study Greek and Roman mythology, traditional stories in school?
Some.
Yeah?
Some?
Okay. But we made it an important part, and the reason we made it an important part in our education is we consider Greece especially to be one of the foundations of Western civilization. The ideas of philosophy, democracy, many other ideas that our society is based on began in Greece. Mathematics, our modern notion of mathematics began in Greece. Okay. At the same time the United States was working to get to the moon, it was also working on telecommunications satellites. Now we all use GPS, we all make phone calls from the United States to China to anywhere. The way that some of these calls go is they go up to a satellite above the Earth and they bounce back. The first one of those was called Telstar. And there have been, that was the first Telstar. There have been very many Telstars. And as a matter of fact, China has a satellite currently called Telstar. I forgot the name, Telstar 10 or 11. So that was in July of 1962. And they made the first transatlantic that is going across the Atlantic Ocean from the United States to France, first television broadcast ever. Now that might not seem like a big deal now, but it was a big deal then. And here's a French stamp that shows, how going from, this was Andover, Maine in the northeast United States, up to the satellite and over to French City. Okay. So this is kind of I'd say kind of a tradition in American music, and probably music around the world, is that when something happens, people write songs about it. This is called a topical song. And so just a few weeks later, like 4 or 5 weeks later, a song called Telstar was written. And the idea of this song is that it represents, I think you're supposed to think of something flying, something very high. So think of electricity. So this is the song Telstar. Here's Telstar by the Tornadoes. The next year, President Kennedy was assassinated, and the vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, took over immediately, just an hour after Kennedy died. Here is Johnson. They're getting ready to get on a plane to go from Texas to Washington. Kennedy was killed in Texas. Something important is Johnson was from Texas. That's important because a lot of the industries, the companies that made the equipment for the space exploration, for the space race, were from Texas. Engineering firms making the rockets and so on. And the ground control in many of the space races, space shots, was in Texas, Houston, Texas. President Johnson was president until January of 1969. And some of the things he was famous for are the Great Society. Great Society was a series of social programs. One of the programs is called Medicare. Medicare is a program that provides health insurance, health care, to people over 65. So it's a government insurance program. Now, in the United States, we don't have a general government insurance program for people. Most people have private health insurance. But when you're 65 or over, you go on government health insurance, which I'm over 65 and that's what I have. So he created that. He signed the Civil Rights Bill, ensuring rights for African Americans. You would call Johnson, in modern terms, you would call him a progressive. Now, there were two sides to Johnson's presidency. One was the Great Society. The other was the Vietnam War. He was the president who prosecuted the Vietnam War, for the most part. Things had already started a bit under Kennedy, even under Eisenhower, but under Johnson, the Vietnam War went forward, and Johnson escalated the Vietnam War. There are things have coming out now that, unfortunately, the United States, at certain times of the war, escalated it, which means made it worse than maybe it should have been. We meaning my friends, the anti-war movement, we didn't like Johnson. As I look back now, I see Johnson as a very mixed figure with, I personally think that his Great Society, his social programs were very good. But we didn't like the Vietnam War. We protested against it. And you can see these two pictures here. People are calling Johnson a war criminal, and then here's another, back LBJ, support President Johnson in Vietnam. What I'd like to look at for a few minutes now is, we were going to space, and when we look back on it and we see Kennedy making this fabulous speech and all this drama, I think we tend to think that everybody in America liked the space program, was for the space program, but it's not true. This graph shows each of these bars, pairs of bars, shows the comparison of how important people thought, this was 1965, how important people thought something else that the government should do compared to what to the space program. So here, for instance, national defense, the military. This bar represents how many people think it's more important compared to the space program. And you can see everything is more important than the space program. Here's another graph. This goes from 1962 through 1972. And what we see here is Apollo being the moon program. You see that right around 69, when Apollo went up, that's when we have, actually it's when it was the beginning of Apollo. When it was high. And then it became high again. Here is when the moon landing happened, right here. So it went up. It went up very high. But interestingly, at the same time, many people are saying that we spent too much on space. By 1972, it was almost 60%. And at the same time that Apollo was popular, many people are saying we're spending too much. Apollo is not worth the cost. This is something that people make jokes about. Americans believe in government programs. Not everybody, but there's a tendency to want the government to do things, but not want the government to pay for it. It's a problem with the American psychology, in my humble opinion. Okay, let's go here. And here is another graph, public opinion of manned moon landings from 1961 to 19, through the landings, the opinion rather, through 1995. Of course, we haven't gone to the moon in a long, long time. The last time was in the early 70s. But as you see, this bar on the right, this is people who oppose moon landings and these people who are favoring moon landings, and you see that opposition to moon landings is usually in the majority or has more support. So not everybody favored the space program. Give me 1 second, I have to rearrange this. Okay, so here's a little interesting story. It's a little bit of a diversion. There is a famous British singer and musician, David Bowie, who died recently. David Bowie made a song called Space Oddity. That name in the middle, Space Oddity. Oddity means something strange, something weird. But this was a joke because there had been a movie just a little before, the previous year, called Space Odyssey. So he was making what's called a play on words. An odyssey means a long journey, a very important journey. So he made this song called Space Oddity. Now, the interesting thing was that David Bowie put out this song, released this song just a little bit before the Americans landed on the moon. And the song is about a man going into space.
I have this song. I listen to this song.
You've heard this song? I'm sorry, go ahead.
In my phone, I have this. I have Space Odyssey.
Oh, you do? Okay, cool.
I have a different version.
A different version?
Yes.
There's a version done more recently by a Canadian astronaut.
Canadian astronaut.
Yeah, a Canadian astronaut. He changed the words. You'll see why he changed the words. So David Bowie put this song out just a little before the moonshot, but according to David Bowie, it didn't have anything to do with the moon landing. It was just a coincidence, two things happening at the same time. He was actually inspired by the movie Space Odyssey. which is a film about exploring space. But interestingly, the BBC, you know what the BBC is? Okay. In those days, the BBC had a monopoly, which means all the radio and TV stations in the UK were owned by the BBC. There were no private networks like we have now. We've got hundreds of them. There were no private networks. So if the BBC did something, that affected everybody in the UK, and there was no other station to do anything about it. So the BBC would not play the song until the Americans came back from the moon. And I think you'll see why. I'll play this song. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm going to have Tom help me. Okay. And put your helmet on. Ground control to Major Tom. Commencing countdown, engines on. Check ignition and may God's love be with you. Major Tom to ground control. You merely made the grade, and the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. Now it's time to leave the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping through the door, and I'm floating in the most peculiar way, and the stars look very different today. For here am I sitting in a tin can, far above the world. Planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still, and I know my way knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much, she knows. Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong, can you hear? So as you see, Major Tom, we don't know whether Major Tom made it back home. That's why the BBC wouldn't allow the song to play. Now, David Bowie made another song later where we find out that Major Tom did make it home.
Oh,
Happy to say.
good. He made a story.
What's that?
He made a story for in a song.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And as we said, there's another version of the song, as we said before, by an astronaut, Canadian astronaut, and he changed the words to get rid of the part where the danger, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong. He made it all very positive. And he made this is a really cool video. He recorded the song while he was in space. Really nice. Okay, so let's take a look at the next. Thank you. So here's some pictures of the moon landing. Footprint, the astronaut next to their lander. A long shot, this is called a crater, a moon crater. Now, I remember watching this on television with my family. My father was extremely excited. We all believed in this. We all thought this was a great thing. Interestingly, many of my friends were not so much into it. A lot of people I knew said, oh, this is a waste of money. Why aren't we spending this money here on Earth? In my family, we were really into it. So here's some things. This is at the airport, Kennedy Airport, I believe. And this is in Central Park in New York City, people. And I like the expressions on their faces. They're all smiling. They're all excited. And this is a famous thing that when the first man, Neil Armstrong, stepped out of the lander onto the moon, he said this thing, one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind.